Earlier this week, one event united people from across our state, across our country, even across our globe. And no, I'm not talking about WrestleMania, even though that's where I was last weekend. I'm talking about, as I'm sure you all very well know, the solar eclipse that happened this past Monday. I looked up some facts about total solar eclipses on astronomy.com, and I want to share a few with you this morning. This is the first total solar eclipse in the U.S. since 2017, and before that you had to go back to February of 1979. The next one won't happen until 2044, and by the way, I have seen that Walt Disney World is in the path of totality in the next eclipse, in case you want to wish upon a star while you watch that other stellar event. The phenomenon isn't limited to events in outer space either. As totality nears, odd things start to happen on Earth. Besides that night-like darkness that we experienced, any breezes or winds will usually die down. Birds will usually stop chirping, and the temperature can drop 10 to 15 degrees. Speaking of totality, this most recent eclipse reached a maximum totality of about 4.5 minutes. But this is not the longest possible totality for an eclipse. The maximum possible totality for any total eclipse is about 7 minutes and 32 seconds. The next eclipse that reaches that long of a totality won't happen until June 13th of 2132, so maybe don't book your hotel for that one just yet. And finally, my favorite of the facts that I found, we get to experience a total eclipse because the sun and the moon have the same apparent size. Even though the sun is about 400 times larger than the moon, it also happens to sit exactly about 400 times farther away, making them appear the same size. Something like a total solar eclipse can make us start to think about some pretty big things. The size of the planet that we live on, the sizes of the sun and the moon, even our neighboring planets, the vastness of our galaxy and our universe. A few hundred years ago, we thought we were the center of that universe. We thought that everything revolved around us. So when during the Renaissance we started to learn that we weren't at the center, that we were really floating on a rock, that it moves around a star, that challenged our perception of our place and our importance in the universe. And thinking about those things can also make us realize just how small we are. Everything we see and experience and love and worry about all of a sudden starts to seem rather insignificant. And when I think about things like the size of the universe and just the vastness of the whole thing, I'll be honest, sometimes a feeling of meaninglessness starts to creep in on me. We are quite small when you look at the bigger picture. And so that brings up some questions in my mind, at least. Why would God create all of that when all we really need is just our own little corner of the universe? What do our lives really mean when you factor in how tiny and unimportant we seem to be? What importance could we really have in any of this? And thinking about all of that, we can start to make us feel like the teacher in the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes. Let's read the first 11 verses of the first chapter of this book. The words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless, everything is meaningless. What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets, and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning to its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new? It was here already, long ago. It was here before our time. No one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. The NIV translation labels this group of verses, everything is meaningless, which is appropriate because that is the overriding sentiment here, and it also says that right up front. Not exactly inspiring, I know. Probably doesn't really fill us with hope for the coming week. But the author of Ecclesiastes, he does have a reason for deconstructing so many things that we hold dear through so much of this book. He ends up arriving at a conclusion of what really matters in life, and that our duty as humans, as people, is to fear God and to keep his commandments. So Ecclesiastes isn't really nearly as depressing a book as it seems to be in its opening verses. There's a very important lesson in all of that. We also, even after realizing where we are in the universe and even our relative size and place within it, we have a similar conclusion to arrive at today. Because actually, I think this total eclipse and all of the events and the discoveries like it should tell us quite a bit about how awesome our God really is and just how important we are to him. I mentioned in the last of our eclipse facts for this morning that we get to experience a total solar eclipse because of the apparent sizes of the sun and the moon, that even though the sun is so much larger than the moon, it sits exactly far enough away that we get to see that event. But actually, there's one more fascinating little detail there. The moon is slowly drifting away from the earth, and so eventually, the moon is going to appear smaller than it does now. And that means that millions of years in the future, if Earth would happen to be around that long, there will be no such thing as a total solar eclipse anymore. So not only does the moon sit at exactly the right place and exactly at the right size it needs to be, not only does the sun sit exactly where it needs to be at the exact size that it needs to be, we also sit exactly where we need to sit in space and in time so that we can enjoy something like a total solar eclipse. There's a level of perfection there that speaks very loudly. But it's not just with eclipses that we find this. We know that our exact spot where Earth sits in our solar system makes it the only place where conditions are just right for us to live. The size of the Earth is just right so that our gravity doesn't crush us or cause us to float away into the atmosphere. The atmosphere itself is just right so that we can breathe, and it protects us from the gases and the radiation that are floating in the universe that we really shouldn't be exposed to. We are surrounded by other planets that do more than just give us something pretty to look at or to study. These larger planets act as a shield for us. They protect us from debris that floats around in space so that we're not constantly getting pelted by rocks. All of this and more has to be balanced on a razor's edge so that life can exist. And if anywhere along the course of time, the force of gravity or the mixture of gases or the temperature in the universe fell to one side or another of that razor's edge, life wouldn't be possible. That level of fine-tuning the conditions in our universe and our planet really should tell us some amazing things. It should tell us that God did not create all of this on a whim. There's a level of design here that we as humans, we can't even comprehend. There is so much that goes into making life possible that simply just does not come from a chaotic and a random universe. Every little detail has been cared for. And as we look out into the universe, as we learn more about what's out there, as we see events like total solar eclipses, we can see the handiwork of a God who works wonders. Of a God that created all of this by speaking it into existence. A simple thought, a spoken word, and it appears. The other thing that this should tell us is how important we are to God and how much our God really loves us. You know, we've been looking at life zoomed out quite a bit this morning. We've been looking at the sun and the moon and outer space and the universe, and that has told us how awesome our God is, how amazing His creation is. But now it's time to zoom back in. It's time to refocus on what this means for us. Because we need to consider the biggest truth of all this morning. And that is that we are important enough that God would create all of this so intricately, so carefully, just so that we can have life. With how big the universe is, with how many amazing things are inside of it, God wants, most of all, to know us. You and I are the most important things in the universe, in all of God's creation, and He wants a personal relationship with you. And you know, if you ever think about the vastness of creation and start to feel small in the grand scheme of things, I think that's the cure. I think that's what gives us the right perspective. God has created all of this. He has done it all so that we can live. Because we are that special to Him. And out of everything else that God has made, His focus is on you. And that shouldn't make you feel small at all. That should make you feel like there's a God who sees and cares and loves you. It should make you feel like you are very important to the one who made everything else. And I also think that should make you feel like you want to live your life for Him in return. So when we think about things like a total solar eclipse, when we hear about exciting scientific discoveries of far-off stars and planets, I don't think we're meant to feel small and unimportant at all. I think we're meant to see the entire creation that tells of the glory and the majesty of our God. I think we're meant to see an entire universe that is screaming to us that in the eyes of the one who made it, there's nothing more important in the entire thing than you and me. This past week was truly a beautiful cosmic reminder of a great and wonderful truth, and one that we don't get to see very often. And so I hope when you think back on this event, or any time you see or hear something like it in the future, that you think of our God of wonders, of His majesty, and of His love for us. And all of God's people said,